Welcome back to BYoungMinistry.com, to another blog and to another podcast. Welcome to those who access the podcast through the BYoung Ministry YouTube channel and the BYoung Ministry Rumble channel. Today we continue in our study of Romans chapter 1. We're in verses 28 through 32, which reads, "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them." That's Romans chapter 1, verses 28 through 32. Today we conclude our study of Romans chapter 1, where we have been considering the essence of sin in verses 24 and 25, the ultimate expression of sin in verses 26 and 27. And today we will consider the extent of sin in verses 28 through 32. The theme of Romans is the gospel of Jesus Christ reveals God's righteousness. And by believing in the finished work of Christ on the cross, man can be made right with God. We do not realize how amazing God's grace is until we have discovered the awfulness of His wrath. Before we can understand the good news of salvation, we must first know the bad news of condemnation. This is why the Apostle Paul addresses the sinfulness of man in the first 3 chapters of Romans. In Romans chapter 1, verse 18, we read, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the ungodliness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness." The bad news is we have been separated from God in life itself. We are all bound for the ultimate consequence of our sin, which is hell. Rebellious man is continually being given over to the consequences of his rebellion against God, whose wrath was awakened by our sin. Sin is a death always dying. 3 times here in Romans chapter 1 we read, God gave them up. Each time, Paul makes a different point. The essence of our sin is shown in verses 24 and 25. The ultimate expression of our sin is revealed in verses 26 and 27. And in today's passage, we see the extent of our sin. In verse 28 of today's passage, we read, "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting." This is the beginning of the extent of man's sin. Rebellious and sinful man does not want to retain God in his knowledge. So, God gave him up to his desires, to exist independently of Him. We abandoned God. As a result, God has let us go our own way. And with sin as our master, we are led to a debased, reprobate, defective, and corrupt mind. As a result, man chooses to do things that are not fitting, things that God never intended for us to do. In verse 29 of today's passage, we read, "Being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers." The first 2 words of this verse says it all. It does not read influenced by or affected by. It reads filled with, being filled with. This means man is continually being filled with the consequences of thinking God is a fool, and he is not. But the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That word unrighteousness means to delight in doing what is opposite of God. This means man deliberately has departed from that which is best for him. The first expression of this is seen in his sexual immorality. The Greek word used here, translated sexual immorality, is the word from which we get our English word pornography, which literally means the messages of prostitutes. This leads to wickedness, which means the sexual perversions to which pornography leads us. Interestingly, this word porneia is most often used of Satan in the Bible. It is active malice. It is not only doing evil, but being evil. The next sin on the apostles' list is covetousness, which reveals the ultimate desire behind all sin. Covetousness is greed, craving more than what we have, and wishing we had what someone else has. The problem with this, we will never be satisfied by anything this world has to offer us. Next is maliciousness, which comes from the Greek goddess Kakia, who personified the spirit of vice and immorality. This goddess was depicted as a vain, plump, and heavily made up woman dressed in revealing clothes. And then there's full of envy, which means hating someone because they have what you want, or they are what you want to be. Following this, there's murder, which is killing someone without just cause, and strife, which is being argumentative and anxious to fight about whatever. And then there's deceit, which literally gives the picture of a fish hook being set in the mouth. The Greek word used for deceit describes a treacherous lie. And then we have evil-mindedness, which is spite or revenge with the desire to hurt or to harm another. And then there is the word whisperers, which is the word for gossipers, and describes private slander. In verses 30 and 31, we read, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. As if this list were not bad enough already, the first descriptor used in verse 30 is backbiters. This word describes people who openly slander others. They do this because they are haters of God, people who do not respect God. They, like Satan, admit God exists, but they so hate him that they openly defy him. Then there's the word violent, which reveals these people have contempt not only for God, but for everyone. Then there's the word proud, which describes a people who display an attitude of superiority. And then there's the word boasters, which describes those who vocalize their seeming superiority. The list next reveals those who are known to be inventors of evil things. They invent devices designed to express filthiness. Disobedient to parents and undiscerning go hand in hand, since how we grow in respect for authority enables us to think most logically and clearly. Untrustworthy and unloving also go hand in hand, since the word used for unloving describes someone who lacks natural affection or brotherly love. The list concludes with unforgiving and unmerciful, which both reveal that they are heartless, cruel, ruthless, and lacking all grace. In verse 32 of today's passage, we read, "Who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them." Once sin runs its course, it drives us deeper into its dungeon of despair and destruction, even though we may not necessarily act in all these ways that the apostle has described. This is the wrath of God at work, and rebellious man is sadly left to the essence, the ultimate expression, and the extent of his depravity. The problem is not with God, as some suggest. The problem is that man loves his sin too much. As a result, God has given rebellious man over to his own destructive self. The design behind giving man over to himself is the hope that when sin has beaten him up so badly, that man has been made ready to welcome the light of God back into his life. For those who get the message, eternity will be the most welcomed sight ever. My friends, I trust this blog and this podcast are helping you in your walk with the Lord. If I can be of further assistance to you, shoot me an email at BYoungMinistry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.